Here goes. Good evening. I'm Toby Katz, and on behalf of the Sisterhood of Temple Israel of Great Neck, welcome to the latest installment in our ongoing lecture discussion series in which we explore a variety of contemporary issues in depth. Tonight, in observance of Veterans Day, we focus on the role of Jewish Americans in the United States military. Jewish Americans served with distinction in every major conflict, often way out of proportion to our numbers in the population. And let's do a screen share. Okay, our program tonight is Answering the Call, Jewish Americans in the Military from Pre-colonial Times to the Present. Our guest speaker is Dr. Sheldon A. Goldberg, docent historian of the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. After the lecture, we'll have time for questions, and because we are such a large group, we ask that you post your questions on chat during the presentation, and if there are similar questions, we may combine one or two just to save time. Unfortunately, we cannot mention every Jewish service member, and you may wonder why some were left out. We also, unfortunately, may not have time to take personal remembrances. We'll see how this goes. Dr. Goldberg will highlight representative stories of each conflict and focus on Medal of Honor winners. For additional profiles, I very strongly recommend that you visit the website of the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. When you go on the website, click on Education, and you'll find a wonderful 26-minute video. You might want to share it with veterans in your family, as well as your children and grandchildren. And after the question and answer session, we'll have some concluding remarks. Before we begin, Sisterhood remembers Thelma San, an active member and wife of a proud World War II veteran, on her first yahrzeit. Now, let's get started. Our special guest is Dr. Sheldon A. Goldberg, docent historian at the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. He lectures at the museum on the participation of Jewish Americans in the United States military going all the way back to pre-colonial times. The museum is Dr. Goldberg's third career. His first career was with the United States Air Force, where he retired as Lieutenant Colonel Sheldon Goldberg after 30 years of service. And let's take a look at that, going back a number of years. Okay. Colonel Goldberg began his career as an enlisted airman, and after 5 years of service was accepted to officer candidate school. He received his commission in 1961. Colonel Goldberg became a navigator, flying cargo transports, and later as a weapons systems officer. He accumulated more than 5,000 total flying hours, flying both the F-4 Phantom and the F-111 Aardvark air fighters. He flew 214 combat missions in Southeast Asia with the only night-dedicated fighter squadron in the Air Force. In the process, he earned 2 distinguished flying crosses for valor and 17 air medals. And we can see them. We can see them right there. Colonel Goldberg spent the second half of his military career in Europe, serving in the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and twice in what was then West Germany. In Germany, He served as the U.S. Air Force advisor to the Commandant, German General Staff. Excuse me, Jamie, are we recording this? Is it on YouTube?
We're recording right now.
Are we also on YouTube?
I could put us there if you'd like. Or
Please.
We could post it after. Sure.
Or you can post it afterwards?
Yes.
Okay. In 1985, Colonel Goldberg retired from the Air Force and began his second career with the CIA. He retired from the CIA in 2002 after 16 years of service and having earned a Career Commendation Medal. After retiring from the CIA, Colonel Goldberg became Dr. Goldberg, earning a doctorate in modern European history from the University of Maryland in 2012. And this led to his third career as docent historian at the National Museum of American Jewish Military History in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Goldberg, in addition, somehow found time to be the technical editor, and he wrote the foreword to the book Jewish Aviators in World War II by Bruce Wolk. His dissertation on the rearming of West Germany after World War II was published in 2017 by Ohio University Press, and it's still in print. The title of the book, From Disarmament to Rearmament, The Reversal of U.S. Policy Toward West Germany, 1946 to 1955. Dr. Goldberg is active in a number of veterans organizations, including the Military Order of the World Wars, the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, the Military Officers Association of America, the Red River Valley Fighter Pilots Association, and of course, the Jewish War Veterans of the United States. Dr. Goldberg and his wife live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and welcome, Dr. Sheldon A. Goldberg. Close this out.
Yeah, thank you very much, Toby. So it's a pleasure for me to be here tonight. And let me get this set up here. Come on. There we go. Yeah, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. I've not been to Great Neck. I recently did a shorter version of this lecture and showed the video that Toby mentioned to a synagogue up in Lawrence, New York, a couple of weeks ago. I hope you appreciate and enjoy what I've got to tell you. So where do we start? Conventional wisdom holds that Jews are not warriors, but our Torah tells us differently. Our biblical ancestors, the Israelites, were mighty warriors. They fought and defeated the Philistines, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and all the other sites and ites of that early period. Next month, we'll celebrate Hanukkah, the victory of the Maccabees over the Seleucids. And even though later on the Romans defeated the Jewish rebellion in the year 70 CE, the ferocity with which the Jews fought made them prize soldiers and officers in the Roman legion. It was only after the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and called the First Ecumenical Council in Nicaea in the year 325 CE that Jews were no longer allowed to serve as soldiers in the Roman armies. Only Christians were welcome, and so the myth of a Jew as a non-fighter began. As an aside, the Jews, however, did continue to fight with the Romans, be soldiers and officers, for a couple of hundred years afterwards. Anyway, let's fast forward to 1654. Asher Levy, a Dutch citizen and leader of the Jewish community in New Amsterdam that had come up from Brazil because of the Inquisition, was faced with Peter Stuyvesant, their New Amsterdam, noted anti-Semite, who tried in many ways to get the Jews to leave. But one of the things that he did was he forbade the Jews to be part of the guard that guarded the city walls and forced them to pay for the burghers that did guard the walls. Asher Levy, being a fairly litigious individual, went to see the West India trading company, which actually sponsored the New Amsterdam settlement, won his case, and 2 years later, 1656, Jews were allowed to bear arms and guard the walls of the city. And we sort of consider that sort of the father of American defense here by Jews. Now, we know that Jews fought in the French and the Indian Wars, and of course, in the Revolutionary War. The numbers are unclear, and they range from 46 to about 150, and several of them stand out. Isaac Franks, for an example, was an aide to General Washington. Lieutenant Colonel Solomon Bush was the highest ranking Jew in the Revolution Army. He was Deputy Adjutant General of the Pennsylvania Militia. Major David Franks, he was an aide to General Benedict Arnold, initially caught up in the espionage, was tried, but through the benefides of General Washington, was found innocent and released. And then General Joseph Bloomfield, he served from 1776 until 1850, ended as a brigadier general, and someone I would consider to be perhaps our first career soldier. Fewer 10,000 Jews lived in the US at the time of the War of 1812, but they also served with distinction. The number of Jews that served are uncertain, but we know of at least 43 who served as soldiers and officers, such as John Ordronaux, a privateer who allegedly captured or destroyed 30 British merchant ships and sunk 5 British warships. The most famous, however, Uriah P. Levy. Levy helped destroy 21 British ships. This again was as a privateer and not as a naval officer. But he later, when he joined the Navy, rose to the rank of Commodore, which was the highest rank in the Navy. Commodore Levy is known for a number of things. He was court-martialed 6 times, once because he killed somebody in a duel who insulted his Jewishness. He also ended the practicing of flogging in the Navy and also the serving of rum that the sailors used to get every now and then. He's also famous for purchasing Monticello. This was Jefferson's home. Jefferson died pretty much in bankruptcy, and Commodore Levy was able to save it from ruin. Today, his name lives on in the beautiful Levy Jewish Chapel at the US Naval Academy. Now, the Civil War saw significant Jewish participation on both sides, with between 6,000 and 8,000 Jews in the Union Army and 2,000 to 3,000 in the Confederate forces. There were at least 7 Jewish generals in the Union Army, but none in the Confederates. The year 1862 was of great import for several reasons. The first was that the first Jewish chaplains were authorized in the Union forces. There were 2 types of chaplains in the military at the time: regimental chaplains, which were elected by the regiments, and hospital chaplains, which were appointed. Now, in 1861, a Pennsylvania regiment, unusual for its time because it had a Jewish commander and mostly Jewish soldiers, had elected a young Jewish scholar by the name of Michael Allen to be their regimental chaplain. The regiment, however, was visited one day by a representative of the Young Men's Christian Association, who filed a protest because the law at the time allowed only regularly ordained ministers of some Christian denomination to be military chaplains. The Army then forced Allen to resign, But hearing this, the Board of Delegates of American Israelites in Washington, D.C., approached Rabbi Arnold Fischel, their chaplain, to intercede with President Lincoln, which he did. 7 months later, in 1862, Lincoln caused the law regarding the chaplains in the military to be changed to allow the appointment of brigade chaplains of the Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish religions. And you can see here on this slide, Rabbi Frankel from Rodef Shalom in Philadelphia was the first commissioned in September 1862 and was a hospital chaplain. Rabbi Bernard Henry Gotthelf from Adath, Israel in Louisville, Kentucky was also a hospital chaplain. And Rabbi Ferdinand and Leopold Sarner, Brit Kodesh in Rochester, New York, and he was a regimental chaplain. He was wounded, by the way, at Gettysburg. 1862 also saw the introduction of the Medal of Honor. And somewhere in here, I have the story of the Medal of Honor. But anyway, what happened was that the army, the Union Army was kind of in bad straits around 1862. And one of the senators decided that it might be a good idea to award some kind of medal to these soldiers and help spur their patriotism. Up until that point, there were no medals given in the Army because medals were seen to belong to foreign governments and dignitaries, and they were not seen as being democratic. A congressman also joined in to give a medal of some type to the Army. 1860 was passed that created the Medal of Honor and initially allowed for 2,000 Medal of Honors to be awarded. Regimental Color Sergeant Benjamin Levy was the first Jew to earn the Medal of Honor. The anecdotal story of Benjamin Levy, and I say anecdotal because the write-ups at the time were very slim. It's really hard to tell, but the story goes that he was a young drummer boy, actually, and his roommate or tent mate went out to fight, and he wanted to go out and join him. And in doing so, he saw that the soldier that was carrying the American colors had been shot, and the colors had fallen on the ground. Levy allegedly ran out, grabbed the colors, rolled them up, held them to his chest, and rolled back to Union lines. And for this, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Oops. Another Medal of Honor recipient was Color Sergeant Leopold Karpeles. Karpeles was a Czech immigrant who had come to the United States with his brother and wound up down in Texas. But he was very unhappy with the way blacks and slaves were being treated in Texas, so he left, moved up to Massachusetts. He enlisted in the Union Army, served as a color corporal, was cited in a number of actions, was discharged, and then about 6 months later, he re-enlisted again, this time as a color sergeant. And at the Battle of Wilderness, he climbed up on a stump as the Confederates were attacking and pushing the Union forces back. The division general rode up on his horse, yelled, "Rally around the flag, boys." There was Karpeles up there waving the flag, bullets flying all over him, and somehow the Union reconstituted itself and pushed the Confederates back. Karpeles was at some point wounded, and the story goes that the daughter of a rabbi from Washington asked permission to take him home so that she could treat him better. She was given that permission. She brought him home. She nursed him. They got married. They had 3 children. Unfortunately, they died, at least, and she died in childbirth of the last child. Her sister came down to take care of the widower, and there were still apparently 2 children alive, wound up marrying the sister. He stayed on in Washington, worked for the government as a postmaster or postal employee in DC. And he is buried in the Washington Hebrew Congregation Cemetery. Karpeles petitioned for his Medal of Honor using the citations that he had received and the actions he had participated in. 1,570 medals of honor were actually put out or awarded during the Civil War. Later on, just before World War I began, an Army commission took back about 700 of these medals because of the way they had been given out so willy-nilly with no hard and fast rules. A battalion, for an example, that re-enlisted were awarded the Medal of Honor, and any soldier that participated in President Lincoln's funeral cortege received the Medal of Honor. So soldiers from the Civil War were able to petition. Not all of them, of course, were successful, but Karpeles was. Now, another Jewish individual, actually, this August Bondi was sort of a guerrilla. He fought with John Brown, but he also became a first sergeant in the Kansas Cavalry later on, and a very dignified and well-known individual citizen. I believe he became a judge and the postmaster in Salina, Kansas. Now, Jews participated also in the Indian Wars and the Haitian insurrection, with a Jewish soldier awarded the Medal of Honor in the former, and a Jewish Marine awarded the Medal of Honor in the latter. He's our only Marine Medal of Honor recipient. Nevertheless, rumors continued that Jews had not fought in the Civil War. And to counter those rumors, in 1896, 63 Jewish Civil War veterans gathered at the Lexington Hall Opera House in New York City on March 15th and formed the Hebrew Union Veterans Association, the forerunner of what is now the oldest active American veterans organization, the Jewish War Veterans of the United States. Nonetheless, in 1899, Mark Twain wrote in Harper's Monthly, and I quote, "The Jew is a frequent and faithful and capable officer in the civil service, but he is charged with an unpatriotic disinclination to stand by the flag as a soldier, like the Christian Quaker." In 1898, however, Jews were with Teddy Roosevelt storming the hill at San Juan in the Spanish-American War. And 7 years later, in 1904, Mark Twain retracted his first article in Harper's and wrote, "Postscript, the Jewish soldier. When I published the above article in Harper's Monthly, I was ignorant, like the rest of the Christian world, of the fact that the Jew had a record as a soldier. I have since seen the official statistics, and I find that he furnished soldiers and high officers to the Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, and in the Civil War, he was represented in the armies and navies of both the North and the South by 10% of his numerical strength, the same percentage that was furnished by the Christian population of the two sections. This large fact means more than it seems to mean, for it means that the Jews' patriotism was not merely level with the Christians, but overpassed it." On April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany, which they did on April 6th. And when the war was over on November 11th, 1918, approximately 250,000 Jewish Americans had served in uniform, of whom 3,500 were killed, 12,000 wounded, and over 1,000 decorated for heroism. And here is a brief slide of statistics, only one of two that I'm going to show you. And you can see that the percentage of Jews in the armed forces was 5.73%, while they were only 3.27% in the total population. So in fact, they served in a percentage higher than those of the general population. In several respects, World War I was a watershed for the primary German Jewish community in the United States. The influx of East European Jews changed the dynamic between the cultures, and by war's end, the German Jewish elite was forced to share communal leadership with their East European co-religionists. Additionally, the cultures, to include Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, united around the issue of helping Jews in Europe and in Palestine as well, resulting in the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. The war also had a cultural impact on another level. Namely, it began a process that was only completed at the end of World War, changing the view of the Jewish community from looking at themselves as Jewish Americans to American Jews. From a military perspective, we see the following happen as a result of the declaration of war. In 1917, Congress authorized the appointment of chaplains at large of faiths not now represented in the body of chaplains in the Army. Thus, 3 days after the declaration of war, on 9 April 1917, 22 Jewish organizations joined together to form the Jewish Board for Welfare Work, now known as the National Jewish Welfare Board. One of their key acts was to endorse Jewish rabbis to serve as military chaplains, a practice they do today. 40% of the English-speaking rabbis in the United States applied. 34 were endorsed, 26 received commissions. This was now the first time that rabbis served as uniformed military officers, and 12 of them served overseas. The first rabbi commissioned was a Rabbi Elkan C. Forsanger of St. Louis, who subsequently received 2 decorations for gallantry under fire and became the senior rabbi of the famed 77th, or the Liberty or Melting Pot Division, of which you'll hear a little bit more about later. Rabbi David Goldberg, not a relation, became the first rabbi to serve in the Navy, and he was responsible for having the tablets of the law and the Star of David approved as the Jewish chaplain's insignia, which is worn on the uniform of all the chaplains, Jewish chaplains, in all the services. Now, there was a draft in the First World War, although they called it selective service. They didn't call it draft because of the riots that occurred during the Civil War. But 42,000 Jews volunteered even before the draft began. But with one major exception, Jews, the majority from New York, accepted the call and went willingly. Now, the exception occurred in Williamsburg in September 1917, where East European Jews, seeing the draft similar to the conscription policies of the Russian Tsar, tried to pull the draftees from the cars that were taking them to the train station. Now, I need to tell you that in those days, when a group of draftees were called, they would report down to the draft building or the draft headquarters, wherever that might be. They were sometimes given a dinner, they were feted, and then they were sort of led in a parade to the train station. Well, in this particular case, there was a riot. The police were called, thousands came out, people tried to drag their sons and nephews, whatever, out of the cars to prevent them from going to war. But the police were called, the streets were finally cleared, and as a result, families and friends of the draftees were subsequently not allowed to get as far as the train platforms when groups of draftees moved out to the training camps. Now, a large percentage of the trainees at camp in Upton, camp was at Camp Upton in Yaphank, Long Island, were Jewish. And among them were they were among the more than 30,000 recruits that trained there. One of those recruits was Irving Berlin, who convinced the commander of Camp Upton to allow him to put on a musical called Yip Yip Yaphank. The musical ran for 6 weeks on Broadway. Berlin, as it turns out, was an insomniac, and that's probably the reason he wrote the song, "Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning." He also wrote another song while he was there. He didn't really think much of it, but it was later made famous by a singer named Kate Smith during World War II. And I'm sure you know the song, God Bless America. Now, initially viewed with apprehension, the Jewish recruits proved themselves to be good and patriotic soldiers and made up more than 40% of the 77th Division that was formed there in the camp. Once in combat, the 77th was the only division to reach the Ain River, penetrating farther into German-held territory than any other American division. The Jewish soldiers of the 77th were called by their officers the best soldiers on earth. One of the more famous episodes of the war involved the 77th Division's Lost Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Whittlesey. Trapped by the Germans behind enemy lines for 5 days without food or water or medical supplies, the battalion was saved by a Polish Jewish immigrant named Abraham Krotoszyński, who, after every other courier was killed, managed to sneak through German lines and get help. Krotoszyński relates that as going through the German trenches to get to the American lines, he was stepped on by a German soldier who fortunately thought he was stepping on a dead man. And when he finally heard American voices, the first thing that came to mind was, what am I going to say? With my accent, how will they know I'm not a German? And he decided on simply saying, hello. He thought that no German in his right mind would ever think of saying hello to Americans. For his efforts, Krotoszyński was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which you can see on the slide here. Let us not, however, forget Minnie Goldman from Chicago, one of 2 Jewish AT&T bilingual telephone operators known as Hello Girls, who served in France with the American Expeditionary Force, and other Jewish women in uniform who served at home and abroad. Now, World War I saw a number of Jewish recipients of the Medal of Honor. There were 4 of them. The wrong way. This, by the way, was the way the Medal of Honor looked just after 1913. You can see it was changed from the original version. We have the Army on the left side of your screen, or at least as and the Navy on the right side. William Shemin was actually the last World War I soldier to receive the Medal of Honor. William Shemin came from New Jersey. He was a tall, strapping 6-footer, wanted to be a forestry officer. He was a football player in college, played semi-pro ball, but he enlisted when the war began. And during the battle, he left the trenches on 3 separate occasions to bring back wounded men. He did this under heavy machine gun and rifle fire. When his platoon officers were killed and he himself were wounded, he was shot in the head. I think it was the left ear. He led the platoon back to safety. He was originally awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, but his family and friends felt that he deserved a lot more. And around 1908, 1909, 1910, somewhere in that time frame, the William Shemin Jewish War Veterans Medal of Honor bill was written up, and it went through some iterations, because in order to get a Medal of Honor, you have to be submitted for it within 5 years of what was happening, or the actions that took place. This was, of course, we're talking already 1910, 1912. It started to go through. It did not pass Congress the first time. It was put in again. This time it went forward. It got a senatorial sponsor. It went forward, but Army bureaucracy stopped because, again, this 5-year suspense had been exceeded, and the Army wanted witnesses. Well, the last World War I veteran, Sergeant Buckles, had died years beforehand. And one of the members of the Jewish War Veterans, a Colonel Erwin Burtnick, who kind of handles this sort of stuff, told the Army they didn't need eyewitnesses. What they needed was to check the statements that had been written and authorized by and signed by certain witnesses to make sure that they had been there at the time. The Army did that, and the bill went forward. It got stopped again because somebody had taken out the waiver to get rid of the 5-year limitation. So it had to be redone again. And finally, it went through, and on June the 5th, 2016, 98 years after the actions took place, the daughters of Sergeant William Shemin were awarded his Medal of Honor. Sergeant Sidney Gumpertz single-handedly silenced a machine gun nest and captured 9 German soldiers. Sergeant Benjamin Kaufman, while attacking a machine gun nest, his right arm was shattered by the machine gun bullet, but he continued on throwing grenades with his left hand. He silenced the machine gun and captured a German soldier. And finally, there was Sergeant William Sawelson, who, like Sergeant Shemin, went into no man's land to bring a wounded soldier water, came back to the trench to bring more water to him, and unfortunately was shot and killed by a sniper. World War II saw 550,000 Jews in the services, as well as 311 rabbis as officers in uniform. And while anti-Semitism existed in the service, this war completed the transition that I mentioned had begun in World War I, namely the changing perspective of those Jews who entered the service as Jewish Americans and came out as American Jews. This period also saw the beginning of what you now hear voiced as the Judeo-Christian heritage in America. Within the services, however, each religion was treated equally in terms of resources and things that they needed. Here too, this war saw 3 Jews awarded the Medal of Honor for heroism. Captain Ben Salomon. Ben Salomon was a dentist, a graduate of the University of Southern California Dental School, who enlisted in the Army after Pearl Harbor, was trained as an infantryman. But when the Army found out that he was a dentist, they pulled him out of the enlisted ranks, sent him to Saipan in time for the first largest land battle in the Pacific. He had been made medical officer because the first battalion medical officer had been wounded, and he was at an aid station in the front lines when the Japanese attacked. They overran the aid station, began bayoneting and killing the wounded soldiers inside. Captain Salomon grabbed the rifle, started to help defend the people inside. He's even known to have headbutted a Japanese soldier. He then ran out front and saw a machine gun emplacement where the American machine gunners had been killed. When the Americans were finally able the next day to push the Japanese back, they found Captain Salomon slumped over the machine gun dead, but a pile of Japanese, of about 90 or so dead Japanese in front of him. He was immediately submitted for the Medal of Honor, but it was turned down because as a medical officer and the Geneva Conventions, he was not allowed to be a participant in what they called offensive operations. Several years later, it was put in again, and again it was turned down allegedly for the same reasons, but I have it on fairly good authority that it was at the time that Nixon was trying to open China. They didn't want to make any noise with the Japanese, who then would be made known of the war crimes that they had committed. So again, they kind of silenced it, said no, he was in offensive operations, and it was refused. And finally, a third time, it was submitted, only this time the argument was made that he was not involved in offensive operations, but defensive operations. And as a result, the medal was awarded. He had no family. He had been an only child. He had no family. The medal was initially presented to the dean of the Southern California Dental School, but it now resides in the Medical Museum of the U.S. Army at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. A last soldier, and I don't know whether I have his picture or not. Yes, I do, is Sergeant Isidore Yachtman from Baltimore. He was known initially as the unknown soldier for a while. He helped save a Belgian village from a German attack. But when they finally found out who it was, they erected a statue with his name on it and in his honor. And the third officer was Raymond Zussman from Hamtramck, Michigan. And he has a Jewish War Veterans Post and Jewish War Veterans Auxiliary named after him, whom I just spoke to actually on Veterans Day evening. Now, at some point after World War II, the military stopped keeping count of who was who by their religion. So as we come into the war in Korea and later, we have absolutely no idea. I shouldn't say absolutely no idea. We just don't know exactly how many Jews were in the military at the time. And so we are going on the assumption that the number of Jews that served in the military was proportionate to the number of Jews in the population. And so we're looking at 1.5% to 2% at the time. The Korean War, however, brought to light the heroism of 2 Jewish soldiers, but only long after the war ended. The first was in 2005, the second in 2015. One was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary who was the victim of much anti-Semitism while in uniform, and the second, the uncle of a current famous musician. Before I get there, I forgot about this particular section. Rabbis in the military, like I said, there were 300 of them, 311. Rabbi Alexander Goody was one of the 4 chaplains who went down with the USS Dorchester after being torpedoed by a German submarine. And he was one that gave up his life vest to a soldier who did not have one. Rabbi Roland Gittleson, 5th Marine Division chaplain in Iwo Jima. When the Iwo Jima battle was over, there was supposed to be an ecumenical ceremony at the graveyard. And although he was allegedly friends with all the chaplains in the Marine Division there, the Protestant chaplains objected to a Jew participating. And so rather than stir the pot, he went away. He was there, but he did not participate at that particular commemoration. A few days later at the Jewish cemetery that was made, he gave a talk that has been titled, "Theirs is the Highest and Purest Democracy." Somebody got a copy of the talk, made copies of it, passed it around. Somebody who received it passed it on to a relative in the States, who passed it on to a newscaster. And before you knew it, it had gone viral in today's terms and was broadcast over the radio. Now again, after World War II, 1947, the National Security Act was passed. The Air Force became a separate service, and as such, a 3rd Medal of Honor was issued after 1965 for the Air Force. Up until that time, they had received the Army one, which you can see here on the left side. That was also somewhat changed. Excuse me 1 second here. I think as I modified my, oh, wonderful. As I modified my talk here to includes some of the last two rabbis. I apparently lost a part of it, but here we go. Like I mentioned, the first soldier to receive the Medal of Honor in the Korean War was Corporal Tiber Rubin. Tiber Rubin had been a Holocaust survivor. He was a Hungarian, was in the camps, learned to survive in the camps by stealing food, stealing whatever he could. And when he was liberated, he swore that if he ever got the opportunity to go to America, he was going to become a GI Joe. Those were his exact words. He did. He came to America. He enlisted in the Army and wound up in Korea. He wound up in a platoon that had an extremely anti-Semitic first sergeant. And whenever there was some crap detail to be done, he would literally call for that son of a bitch Jew, Rubin, and tell him what to do. And Rubin would do it, and he would come back for more, and it would happen over and over again. When an attack came by the North Koreans and Chinese, the platoon was being forced to retreat. The sergeant again called for Rubin, gave him some guns and some grenades, and told him to be the point man and hold the bad guys off while the platoon retreated. They would come and get him in 24 hours. And he did exactly that. With rifles and carbines and grenades, he held off the attacking forces. 24 hours came, 24 hours went. Nobody went after him. Nobody came back for him. And he finally just left the position and went back and joined his platoon. At some point in the battle, he was wounded and captured and wound up in a North Korean prison camp. And there he was cited for using the skills that he had learned in the concentration camps to go out and steal food from the Chinese or the North Koreans, steal medical supplies, steal whatever he could, bring them back into the POW camp, and tend to the American soldiers who were captive there. He is known to have stayed up for 24 hours just picking lice off one soldier's head. The morale, I think those of you who are old enough to remember the Korean War know that the morale in the pre-OW camps in Korea was very, very poor. He was offered the opportunity to go back to Hungary. He would be freed, but he stayed where he was until the war ended. He was not awarded for anything. He received no medals whatsoever until about 2004, when the Jewish war veterans decided that something had to be done, and through their efforts, he was finally recognized. And in September of 2005, President George W. Bush presented him with the Medal of Honor. Private Leonard Kravitz, the uncle of the rock musician Lenny Kravitz, was a machine gunner. And similar to Captain Salomon, was manning his machine gun, or he was actually an assistant machine gunner. The platoon that he was attached to was also forced to retreat. The machine gunner was killed. He volunteered to stay back. They told him to come, but he said no, he would take care of things. He would protect the platoon, which he did. And in fact, he was killed doing that. And a friend of his spent many, many hours and many years trying to get him recognized, and finally did. And on March of 2015, I believe it was, yes, March of 2015, President Barack Obama presented Leonard Kravitz with the Medal of Honor. Now, lastly, Vietnam War also saw two Jews receive the Medal of Honor. The first one was Captain Jack Jacobs, who you will see if you view the video on the museum. He introduces the video for us. And he was a liaison officer to the Vietnamese, and during a surprise attack was able to pull a number of wounded Vietnamese back despite wounds that he himself received, and he saved several lives in that action. And for that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. This thing always goes a little bit crazy here. Airman John Levittow has a backstory, an interesting story on this. An airman, he was flying in a gunship, a C-47 gunship as a crew chief that was circling a special forces camp one night in the northern half of North Vietnam. When the airplane was hit by a mortar shell that blew a hole in the fuselage and spread shrapnel all over the airplane. Airman Levittow received 40 wounds on his back and in his legs. The loadmaster, who was getting ready to throw out a flare, these flares are about 3 feet long, about 24 inches in diameter, weigh about 40 pounds and put out 1 million candle power of light. They're magnesium flares. He had just armed it when the shell hit, and he dropped it on the floor as the airplane started to do its various maneuvers in the sky as a result of the explosion. Levittow, often sliding in his own blood, made several attempts to grab the flare. Finally, he was able to grab it, threw it out the aircraft just as it ignited, thereby saving both the airplane and the crew. And for that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, the interesting thing that reflects on the trouble that we have in distinguishing who belongs in the museum and who doesn't belong in the museum is that when he was inducted into the museum, his wife, I guess, and other members of the family were there and thought this was all well and good, but she did not understand why, of all things, John was being inducted in a Jewish museum. And at that point, someone brought out an application form that John Levittow had filled out. And on the application form, there was a statement that says, I certify I've been honorably discharged, so on and so forth, and that I am of the Jewish faith. And this was the first time that his family learned that John was Jewish. Now, as I mentioned today, we can only assume that the number of Jews in the active duty military is a bit less than the proportion of Jews in the population. We assume there's about 15,000. What we do know, however, is that since 9/11, 66 Jewish servicemen and women have died in the defense of the United States. And I want to close my talk with just 2 of them. Specialist Daniel Agami. He was a modern Orthodox Jew whose father had served in the Israeli army. He enlisted in the army in 2005. He was known to his buddies as the Hebrew Hammer. He served as a Bradley fighting vehicle gunner in Iraq and was killed when an IED exploded near the tank he was riding on. Daniel had earned the Combat Infantryman Badge, which is shown here at the top of this view graph. And he was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor for an earlier action. Lastly, First Lieutenant Rosalind Schulte. She was the first female Air Force Academy graduate to die in combat. She was an All-American high school lacrosse player. She captained the Academy women's lacrosse team, and she was a wing superintendent and group commander. As an intelligence officer, she volunteered for service in Afghanistan, where she was subsequently killed by a roadside bomb outside Kabul on the way to an intelligence conference. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of my talk. If there are questions, and I hope that there are, I will be more than happy to do my best to answer them. And for those that you might be interested, if you ever get down to Silver Spring, Maryland, please stop by the Bender Junior Jewish Community Center and look at the memorial that my post has built, which is the largest Jewish veterans memorial in the state of Maryland. And with that,
Okay,
I am back again.
okay. Thank you. Jamie, do we have questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat group. There aren't too many people. Maybe I'll let people unmute and that they
Yeah.
could raise hands.
Okay, what if you have any questions, just speak up. Anybody?
Or if somebody wants to raise their hand if they have a question, I could try and spot them.
Well, why don't I start with a question? What's actually a comment? Captain Solomon, who was refused the Medal of Honor on the grounds that he was not a combatant, but as a medical person, was technically not eligible for the Medal of Honor. In the South Pacific, according to the Geneva Convention, in the South Pacific, the Japanese refused to recognize the Geneva Convention, and medical people had to take training and had to carry a rifle. So the technicality for not honoring him with a medal did not really exist in the theater of war that he fought in. Did anybody bring that out?
The Americans will recognize the Geneva Convention.
Yeah,
Whether
but
the
the Japanese did not.
well, that's immaterial. I mean, it wasn't the Japanese who were going to award him a medal. It was
True.
the Americans. And that's why I say the second time the award went in for consideration, the argument of offensive operations was really a cover-up so that the politics of the situation, trying to open China, not to get the Japanese upset, and having to bring out the fact that they committed war crimes because we also allies with the Japanese was the reason for the cover-up. And so somebody finally came up with the idea, well, hey, he was defending himself. He was defending his people. That makes the objection of the Geneva Convention null and void, and it went through.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, who's the highest
And we do
ranking
have
soldier?
I do have a question here from the San family.
Yeah,
Okay,
Who
they
is
asked who is the highest ranking Jew in the US military? Well, like I said, there was the one from the Revolutionary War. There was Commodore Levy in the War of 1812, or after the War of 1812, I should say, 7 generals in the Civil War on the Union side. There was 1 Jewish general in the First World War. In the Second World War, there were a number of 2- and 3-star and even 4-star generals. The father of the Seabees, I believe his name was Admiral Moriel, was the first naval staff officer to make a 4-star rank. And his name constantly escapes me. We had a 2-star major general, was the highest, he was Jewish in Europe. He was the highest flag officer to be killed in Europe in World War II. The irony of it is that he was came from a rabbinic family, corresponded with his family in Yiddish, but nowhere on his official papers was he marked down as being Jewish. One indicated that he was Protestant. His wife said he had converted, but we don't know that for a fact. More recently, the last 2 chiefs of staff of the Air Force, General Norton Schwartz and I should know his name. The last one, both of them were Jewish. They were 4-star generals. Admiral Bourda was chief of naval operations a while back. The deputy commandant of the Marine Corps, also 4-star general back in, it would have been just before 2008, was Jewish. That's the ones that come to mind. I wasn't prepared for that. Otherwise, I'd have some more names, but they're there. David Golden. David Golden. Saying, thank you, Mr. Horowitz. You're right. His son, I believe, however, is not Jewish. I think his son has converted. He's also an Air Force officer.
How about Hyman Rickover, Admiral?
Yeah, he was 4-star, but he really did not take his Jewishness very seriously, from what I understand.
I think he
But we
converted.
still, that may be, but I think we still consider him one of the tribe. There was a question, why are all the ribbons blue with 13 stars? Well, 13 stars, of course, represents the 13 states. I have no idea why it was decided to be blue. That was the way it was. It wasn't designed that way at first, but apparently when they changed the design just prior to World War I, that's what they came up with.
When you mentioned a general who was killed, are you thinking of General Rose,
General
The ta-
Rose, right?
the tank
Absolutely.
commander?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he was a division commander from.
He was a division
He
commander.
was a
Yeah,
division commander. Yes.
yeah.
Maurice
When they were,
Rose. I do not know why I can't retain that name, but yes.
maybe it's too simple. No, when they were surrounded and forced to surrender, he was called out by the Germans and
Well,
shot point blank.
Well, there's various stories of what happened, that they were sort of just facing one another. And I think the Americans were asking the Germans to surrender. The Germans decided the Americans should surrender, and then somebody pulled out a gun and shot them. I don't know that they really know I don't know the actual story. Let me put it that way. I've not
Okay.
read the actual report or anything.
Well, that sort of solved the problem as who does what first. So that,
Yeah, no.
do we have any other questions
Let's
or
see there.
comments?
Let's see here on chat.
Any,
I-
Barbara, were you gonna ask something?
I did already about Rickover. I've already asked.
Okay, fine.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else going once? Okay. Dr. Goldberg, thank you so much for sharing the stories of so many Jewish Americans who answered the call and served our country with honor and distinction.
Yep.
And in appreciation, the Sisterhood of Temple Israel of Great Neck will make a donation to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History in your honor.
I appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you
This
so
was
much for
really,
inviting me.
oh no, thank you for coming. This was absolutely wonderful. You know, actually,
Yeah, I only came from dinner in the kitchen to the dining room here, so it was no big trip
it's
for
so
me.
much easier. You don't have to get dressed up. We don't even have to be dressed from the waist down. Actually, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I
No,
normally wear my JWV polo shirt, but you can't see the symbol on it, so I decided not to today anyway. But
well, that's the problem. We're only photographed from basically
right,
the chest up, and that's it. But no, this is what we were talking before we started, how wonderful Zoom is, even though it's like in the military, sometimes out of necessity, all these wonderful things come out. And here too, out of necessity, we're able to bring people from all over the country, all over the world, literally, and we are grateful. And Sheldon, thank you so very much.
well,
We need to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, remember my offer that if you can talk to any one of the youth groups and they would like to have me talk to them, I'm more than welcome to do that.
Well, actually, I've already started.
Okay.
But I most certainly will. And we need to share these stories as well as our own stories. And if you are a veteran or currently active duty, share your stories with your family. Offer to speak to school groups or adult groups. Example, several years ago, a middle school parent in my own town organized a tribute to World War II veterans. The students were studying World War II in their history class, and they were asked to interview a veteran in their family using specific and obviously age-appropriate questions. This was designed to help the students understand what the service members did and the impact it had on their personal lives. Now, those who didn't have a World War II veteran were given a list of names from the local American Legion post. And my late father, Louis Katz of blessed memory, was on the list. And let's see if I can get back to share here. Here we go. Whoops, bear with me 1 second. Okay, this is not it. My father did not write this book. Okay, here we go. He served 4 years in combat in the South Pacific and was the supreme commander of the Japanese forces in the Pacific, surrendered directly to his unit. And there on top you see the sign of his division, 32nd Division. It was the Red Arrow Army. These were the major battles ending in Luzon in the Philippines. And that's a picture of my dad in 1945 on one of many beaches that they landed in. My father was interviewed, and a copy of that interview is now in the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Now, after the program, there was a wonderful ceremony in the middle school auditorium with band music for the kids and a presentation for each veteran. And for the kids, this gave the history class new meaning, because they were able to talk to people who said, this is what I did. This is the impact that it had on my life. And as my late father said, and that's why there's that flag behind me, after the recognition and everything, he said, you know, after all these years, it's nice to be remembered. Thank you for joining us. If we have no other comments, okay, thank you for joining us. And good night.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Sheldon, thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. I
Appreciate
definitely
it.
promise to spread the word.
Thank you
Thank you.
much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Very interesting.
Good
Good
night,
night,
all.
everybody. Good night. Jamie, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.